Today's discussion is on corresponding parts of congruent triangles. So I'm going to title these notes, Corresponding Parts of Congruent Triangles. All right, and this is 4.6 in your book, if you are curious what section that is. So first thing I want to say is, let's say we have two triangles, triangle ABC, and I say that triangle ABC is congruent to triangle DEF. Automatically, you know that because they're congruent, they're the exact same triangle. All of their corresponding angles and all of their corresponding sides are congruent to each other. So what I'm going to write over here is that all corresponding sides and angles are congruent. And that's kind of your main takeaway here. I'm going to box that in yellow, highlight it. So to illustrate this, let's draw a picture. So triangle ABC, let's say it's this guy, ABC, and here's triangle DEF. So what I know here is that angle A corresponds with angle D. And because they're corresponding angles, they have to be congruent because these triangles are congruent. I know angle B corresponds with angle E, so they're congruent. And I know angle C corresponds with angle F because they're congruent because they correspond. So corresponding means that they're basically in the same spot in each triangle. Now, the same goes with the sides. I know side AB corresponds with side DE, so they're congruent. Same thing with BC and EF, and same thing with AC and DF. So if I wanted, I could write all of my congruence statements for all of the corresponding parts. So for my sides, I would know that side AB is congruent to side DE. I would know that side BC is congruent to side EF. And I would know that side AC is congruent to side DF. And that's for sides. Now for my angles, I do the same thing. I know that angle A is congruent to angle D. I know that angle B is congruent to angle E. And I know that angle C is congruent to angle F. So those are all of my congruent angles. So when triangles are congruent, all of their corresponding sides and angles are congruent. So let's look at an example of how we would apply this. So this was your homework last night, and I told you guys to skip the back part. So what we're going to look at is a proof. And when we write these proofs, we're going to write them in sentence form, but I want all of your sentences to say something because something, something because something. So you're always giving a reason for why you're making your statement. So first of all, I'm going to mark my diagram. I know KY is congruent to RA because it's given. I know that KY is parallel to RA because it's given. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, okay, I know that because these lines are parallel, these are alternate interior angles, so they're congruent. I also know that this middle segment's congruent to itself. So this top triangle and this bottom triangle are congruent by side angle side. And if I know they're congruent triangles, then I know KR is congruent to AY because they're corresponding parts. So I'm going to go ahead and get started with this. So I'm going to say KY is congruent to RA and KY is parallel to RA. And the reason I know that is because the information was given. Because it was given. Now I'm going to say angle KYR is congruent to angle YRA. And the reason I know that is because they are alternate interior angles of parallel lines. Okay, third thing I'm going to say is RY is congruent to RY. Because of, and this is called the reflexive property of congruence. Whenever something's congruent to itself, it's called the reflexive property of congruence. So RY is congruent to RY because of the reflexive property of congruence. So notice I basically have one statement here, I have another statement here, I have a third statement here. Now I've stated that my side, my angle, and my other side are congruent on these two triangles. So now I know that triangle KYR is congruent to triangle, and make sure you line it up. A corresponds with K, R corresponds with Y, and then the Y. So KYR is congruent to ARY because of side, angle, side. Now, if I know these two triangles are congruent, so this triangle here is congruent to this triangle here, I know all their corresponding parts are congruent. So I can say now that KR is congruent to AY because they're corresponding parts of congruent triangles. So the last thing I'm going to say is KR is congruent to AY because they are corresponding sides of congruent triangles. So a couple of things I'm going to point out, and that's it. I've done it. I proved it. Done. So notice how for each statement, I have a statement, and then I say because, and I give the reason why. For this second statement, these angles are congruent because, and then I tell why. RY is congruent to RY because. And then fourth, this triangle is congruent to this triangle because. And then my last step, this is congruent to this because. So for each statement I make, I tell you why it's true. So it's this because this because this, and so on. All right? I'm going to let you guys do the rest on your own. And if you have questions, feel free to ask.